All right, thank you, Matt. Like he said, I'm Jay Winker with Brooks Construction. I am, just like every one of you, I'm not a public speaker, so bear with me, okay? I'll tell you that right up front. Everybody here, you're a supervisor of some sort, so I know all of you guys spend a lot of time communicating, so that's why we're just going to give a real quick overview on communication, different parts of it, why it's important, and what you can do to make it better. So get started here. All right, so what is effective communication? There's basically four parts: the sending, person doing the talking, the listening, the understanding, the meaning, the expectations that are being conveyed, and giving and receiving feedback. What is effective communication? There's three ways. There's upward to your boss, there's down to your crews or your team members, and then there's lateral amongst you and your peers. The actual definition of communication is the process of passing information and understanding from one person to another. There are three types: verbal, nonverbal, which is body language. You can gain a lot from that, and written. So now we'll take a look at the three different types in more depth. First is verbal communication, which is critical. We'll discuss that here in a minute. It's time consuming. Think about how much time you spend getting all the information to the different people that need to get it when it's all verbal. It's not an email, you can't hit a send button. And then persuasive or pervasive, which you have to get it out to everybody. So that's why email or group texts are great now. It's not all verbal. It's critical. It's important. Research has indicated that 2/3 of all errors on the job site are due either directly or indirectly to communication, cause problems and or difficulties. This is true regardless of the project size. You have to be specific, and even then, you're still probably going to have mistakes or errors based on communication. Like I said before, verbal communication is very time-consuming. Here it says supervisors generally spend 60 to 90% of their time communicating. I think we can all attest to that. That's about all we ever do. And about 90% of the communications on a job site is verbal. Now, technology has increased the time spent because nobody's ever at home anymore. You've always got your iPhone with the emails, text, so you're always communicating one way or the other. Like I said, it's pervasive. As a supervisor, you have the information that needs to get to everybody on the crew, so you've got to be able to spread that information out effectively. Not only if you're with INDOT or a contractor, you spend a lot of time trying to get this information down to the lowest level of people that need to know what's going on. Effectiveness of verbal communication. Here are some numbers. When people are attentive and they're actually paying attention, they absorb at most 50% of what's said. So then 1 week after that, you remember only about 20% of what you remembered originally. So basically, when there's communication, you're only going to end up remembering about 10% of it, of the conversation. So basically, in conclusion, you need to reinforce what you want people to absorb, repeat it, and follow it up in writing. That way, they have written record of it. I guess here, let me ask you this. It's happened to me, but how many times have you had people say that, well, you never said that? Well, that's happens all the time. So, like I said, follow up in writing. That's the best practice. Barriers to communication, distractions. The ineffectiveness in communication is largely the result of these barriers. To improve it, you got to find a way to remove the barriers. You know, whether it's noise, when you're out on the road and you're next to a paver or an MTV, you've got traffic going by, you need to figure out a way to eliminate that and overcome that. And it's the responsibility of the sender. So myself, when I go out on a job, it is up to me to find out a way to get those barriers, get away from those barriers so that the information can be relayed to the crew. So like I said, physical barriers, the working environment, noise, you know, from traffic, equipment, you know, the milling machine, you name it. You got to be able to figure out a way to get by those. And they are the easiest to remove. I guess for me, I try to get with my foreman, you know, before the day gets started when they don't have everything going on. So I can get their attention and they're not trying to hear me over the paver or the trucks or the mill. Sender barriers, when you're doing the communicating, you got to make sure that your message is well defined. It's complete. How you're saying the information is not confusing to the receiver, and make sure that the words or examples that you're giving aren't offensive. We'll get to that later. Get feedback from the person you are giving the information to make sure they understood what you told them. These are a little bit more difficult to deal with because the problem resides, you know, with the individual. It's not a physical barrier that can be removed. It takes a little bit more effort. Listener barriers, you know, a listener doesn't receive the message. Examples of this includes the listener isn't paying attention. And here's some numbers for you. The human brain can process 350 to 500 words per minute. The average human speaks about 120 to 180 words per minute. So basically what that means is you can be talking to me and I can be thinking about a lot of different things going on. So if I'm not giving somebody my full attention, good chances are I'm going to miss what they're telling me. Next one, you got to watch out for the listener jumping to conclusions. They're not listening to the full message. They think they already know what you're going to tell them. Listener rejects the message as contradictory to his or her beliefs. You know, for our young project managers to go out on a field and tell a paving foreman what needs to be done, a 30-year veteran's going to think they already know it all. So that's just something you got to watch out for. And this is the most difficult barrier to deal with because it requires diplomacy. You got to finesse. You got to figure out a way to get your message across and have them receive it. Told you we'd get back to cultural barriers. You got to watch out. Don't know how much of this we have in the paving industry, but some examples of cultural barrier. Clariol introduced a new product in Germany, the Clariol Mist Stick, only to find out that mist is slang for manure. So basically there's the manure stick. Coors Brewing translated a marketing slogan, "Turn it loose," into Spanish. It read, "Suffer from diarrhea." And then in China, Pepsi had a come alive with the Pepsi generation ads, but they actually translated into Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the grave. And then Frank Perdue's chicken slogan, "Takes a tough man to make a tender chicken," was translated in Spanish into "It takes an aroused man to make a chicken affectionate." So, you know, those are some extremes there. Improving the effectiveness of verbal communication. There's 4 different techniques we can use here. Repetition, like I said, repeat it multiple times, the important parts of it, so they can absorb it. You can tell back or paraphrase, feedback, and follow up. You know, repetition. You know, say what you're gonna say it, and then repeat back, you know, what you've said. Or You know, you can give the message and then repeat it again in a slightly different way, just to make sure they understand and re-emphasize the important parts. Tell back or paraphrase, just to make sure that the receiver actually understood what you're telling them. Basically once you relay the information, have them tell you what you just said, to make sure they understood what you told them in the directions. And if it's not correct, then do it again until they understand what you're actually trying to convey to them. Feedback. The whole purpose of giving the feedback is to find out whether the sender or receiver thinks about the message. You know, ask for feedback as well as giving feedback. When giving it, you got to focus on the specific facts, clearly describe what you think, keep the tone positive, and limit your comments to the key issues. Final one is follow-up. Since verbal communication is very ineffective, it's important to write down the key facts. Information that verification will be done, and verify that expected actions were done. I'll do this with our crews, you know, which it may seem like I'm nagging, but if I give them a task in the morning, I may call back just to make sure it gets done. And it's just to verify. As Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. Meetings. I think all of us can attest to this, that it seems like sometimes we schedule meetings to schedule meetings. So, but we can make them effective, and here's some keys to it. Is the meeting really necessary? You know, does the problem actually require a decision? Can a group of people best come up with a solution, or is it just a 1 or 2 people deal? You know, if it's only a couple people, you don't have to have a meeting for it. Could it be done over the phone? And are the required experts on the list of invitees? That's the number one most important. I mean, how many times have you guys walked into a meeting just to realize that the actual decision maker who's going to make that decision is not even there? You know, it's a waste of everybody's time. Steps to having a productive meeting. Prepare for it. Make sure you have a detailed agenda and send it out in advance so people can review it. And when you do that agenda, make sure you've gathered as much information on each item as you could, thoughts, opinions, or actual factual data. Identify various alternatives which could help resolve those issues. I mean, that's the best way for me. When I walk into a meeting and we may have an issue, I've at least got some ideas of what I would propose that we do to resolve it. But that helps the meeting move along instead of everybody just looking at each other. You got to anticipate pushback, questions, and finally, make sure notify the attendees of the time and place and establish a time limit. That's another important deal, is to make sure you don't have a meeting that should last a half hour and have it last an hour, hour and a half. Now, when you have the meeting, just to be respectful of everybody, we're all busy, so make sure you start on time and finish on time. Stick to the agenda, limit distractions or going off on tangents. Get everybody's ideas and opinions on it. Clarify the decisions. Make sure you recap this is what I do. I recap the decisions and who is responsible for the action items. And finally, get the commitment from all who must support the action to be taken. After the meeting, immediately document the main ideas and decisions reached. You can send out meeting minutes, so then there's a record of what was discussed and what was decided, and the actual action plan. And then follow up later on to check, make sure that the actions have been carried out. And then file a copy of the minutes for later use if needed. So if there's ever a disagreement, you can always go back and look at the meeting minutes. You know, let's say a pre-con. How many times have people gone back and had to look at pre-con meeting minutes to see what was discussed or agreed to? So some conclusions on verbal communication. The time and effort that you spend on improving verbal communication is well spent. As a supervisor, you must communicate with the crew, the owner's rep, everybody, you know, even the public, as much as sometimes we don't want to, we have to. And then meetings are a necessary evil, but can be made more productive with a little bit of effort and planning. Second type of communication is nonverbal, which is body language. You can learn a lot from people. You can actually get what they may not verbally tell you what they're thinking, but you can get an idea of what they're thinking just by their nonverbal communication, whether they're nodding in agreement, raising eyebrows, rolling the eyes, tight-lipped frown, crossed arms. Personally, I'm old-fashioned. I still like to talk to people in person just so I can get that nonverbal, so I can see what their reaction is to it. Because a lot of times on the phone or email or text, you don't get that. You can't understand. So, third type, written communications. Honestly, this is probably one of the best ways to communicate just because there's a written documentation. You can always go back and look at it. Change orders gives indication of approval. It doesn't change once it's on paper. You know, you always have it. Everybody's got it. It also supports a mutual understanding. Can't stress this enough. I had a job one time, believe it or not. I had 3 different project supervisors and 2 different area engineers over the course of a 2.5-year project. So it was very important on that job that everything was documented and in writing so I could pass it along from one to another. Job site documentation, which let's be honest here. In this day and age, job site documentation has become so much easier with iPhones or iPads, taking pictures, voice command. You can voice to text all your notes. It builds you can build a chronological order, you know, whether it be a job log, time cards, record drawings, or field authorizations. Like I said, technology and communications, you know, you have laptops, iPads on every project, iPhones in every pocket. You do have email overload, which I will attest to this. I do like email just for the mere fact that it is the record. You can put it in a file and it never changes. But that does result in a lot of emails for everybody. You got project-specific websites, high-resolution cameras for the project documentations, and then, you know, the last time I presented this, I never really knew what mobile video conferencing was, but now I do. So I think everybody knows, you know, with Zoom and Teams, you know, anymore you don't have to be in person to have a meeting. So in wrap up, the 8 keys: active, emphatic listening, check the nonverbal messaging, solicit feedback, achieve true understanding, maintain emotional control, balance your communications, find out your blind spots, and build working partnerships, not barriers. That's all I have. Any questions from anybody? Thank you.